make sure the stream is going and let the audience trickle in. All right, we are good to go. Welcome everyone to the 2021 Cannabis Industry Roundup. This is a regular show, I guess we'll call it, that we do with our alliance partners at Arcview, where we're going to get together and talk about everything cannabis. Usually we do sort of a monthly look back, but because it's December, we're going to be taking a look at 2021 as a whole, and we'll be walking through highlights, lowlights, and then finish with some predictions and discussions about where we see 22 taking us. So I'll bring my guests on right now and give them each a second to introduce themselves. Hello, Jeanne and David. How are you guys doing today?
Hi, Chris.
Doing pretty well.
From New York City.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. So people who've watched this before, they know David very well. This is our third time. Essentially, we're co-hosts at this point, so we'll keep it rolling. But Jeanne, you are a new face on here. Tell us a little bit about, so you already mentioned you're New York, you're East Coast. Tell us a little bit about what you do.
Thank you, Chris. I am so proud to be part of the Arcview team. I have been in the cannabis industry since 2014 because that was the year that New York passed the Compassionate Care Act, and we got involved with one of only 10 licenses that are here in the city. It's here in the state, actually. More on that in a bit. And so I am part of Arcview Ventures, and we have founded not only a fund where we've made 15 investments, but we stand up other investment platforms for a very wide, interesting group of investors.
Great. Thanks so much. And David, remind everyone sort of who you are and what you're up to.
Sure. I'm a principal at Arcview Management Consulting. We provide strategic consulting services to the cannabis and hemp industries. In addition to my work with Arcview Consulting, I also sit on the boards of the Arcview Group, Oaksterdam University, Minority Cannabis Business Association, and the Marijuana Policy Project. And great to be here again. Looking forward to talking a little bit about what's happened this year and what we can look forward to or fear coming next year.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we can all agree 2021 was a lot like every other year of the cannabis industry, and that it was a bit of a roller coaster. We had some highs, some lows, and it's just a mixed bag every time out. But let's just dive right in for highlights of 2021. So I'm going to throw it to you first, Jeanne. You are our person on the ground on the East Coast. What has happened out there? How excited is everyone?
So I'll take you to the East Coast, but you just spoke about the roller coaster, but guess what? 2021, Chris, we had forward motion. 5 important states, well, at least some of them are important, really adopted adult use legislation. That's big because 3 critical states, New Jersey, New York, and Connecticut, were in that 5. The other 2 were New Mexico and Virginia. That's important because there are millions of people, far more than just the state of California, in that collection. So we're happy about that. It's pretty cool. And 15 states passed steps to expand what's going on in medical. I think that's important. Like, here's an example. California actually put this together. I find this quite fascinating that hospitals are allowed to use medical cannabis for certain conditions. And Texas, which has been in the backwoods on anything regarding cannabis, is allowing some low-dose THC products to be used for PTSD or cancer. I think both of those initiatives are pretty big and show some breakthroughs, don't you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, the tide has absolutely been shifting. We've seen, public opinion is swayed, and it takes a little while for politicians to catch up, but they're catching up as well. And the tide is really turning.
What's interesting to me is only 2 states don't have any medical or adult use. That's Idaho and Nebraska. but there's rumblings in both states and some initiatives around legislation. So I like that. And something I really love to share, and it's a good segue into what the heck's going on the East Coast, because did you hear the rumbling? There is an enormous wave that's headed to the East Coast, especially from what I just shared on the adult use legislation. This is a big breakthrough for big states that have been very slow to adopt. But I love to share with people something that I had to learn, and most people don't know. Why is it all these Western states, beautiful states like Colorado and California and Washington and Oregon have all these gorgeous products, etc., and big, robust marketplaces, not without problems, but you know, uh, very interesting dispensaries and grow operations, etc. That's because they have citizen ballot initiatives. And except for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, we can only do this kind of legislation through our state Congress, House, Senate, etc. So it's a much bigger slog. It's hard versus citizens who actually say, I want this. We don't have that opportunity. And so it has to go through a big ordeal, advocacy against and for. And that's why, taking us up now to the East Coast, after a lot of pain, Andrew Cuomo did not want to adopt cannabis. And March 31st, under some duress, he signed something called the MRTA statute. And it's a pretty exciting statute. I'm proud to say it took a woman, Kathy Hochul, our new governor, to say, I'm going to make up for lost time. Never mind that next year is a re-election campaign, right? Or actually an election campaign since she was appointed. So this is an important piece of her platform. Hey, for tax revenue, for wealth, for all the things we all know in the cannabis industry that are important. And so it's pretty exciting. So a few things have to happen in a great big uh, politically congested, let's say, state like New York. First, you have to issue the regulations. And all those of us who are here and playing in the New York sandbox for cannabis are disappointed to know that that's not just going to happen in short order. And it's been explained to me, these are meticulous, tough set of regulations. So we're disappointed to know they're probably not going to be issued till later in 2022, because you have to hire a staff of really a couple hundred people. And thankfully, she did appoint some of the leaders in this cannabis control board. So in New York, we are moving from the Department of Health into a cannabis control board that's going to be under the Liquor Commission. So that shows a lot of interesting change right there. So we have only had, I find this so interesting and really quite strange if you think about it. New York has 20 million people. We only have 10 licenses.
That's
Each
crazy.
license, I know it's not, think about Oregon, think about Oklahoma with far fewer people. So each license holder can grow, extract, and you get 4 dispensaries. And those dispensaries were mandated to us to be dispersed around the state. So under the new statute, each of those 10 are going to be allowed to build 4 more dispensaries, so a total of 8. But only 3 of the 8 today are going to be allowed to be adult use. Now you can believe already that they are clamoring with lobbyists up and down the streets of Albany to make all 8 a mixed adult use as well as medical. That has not happened yet, but that's what they want. And you can see why. The people of New York want cannabis. It is the largest legacy market in the world right here. People want this. And so, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit, because we want to be able to bring that legacy market into the legal market. But just to share, the statute already has some things that other states didn't think about in their statute. First of all, social consumption lounges are built right into the statute. We love that. We do believe we'll be the next and upscale Amsterdam. It's an international traveled city, as you know. It's vibrant. We had a conference even this year in the Rainbow Room. How fun to go to the Rainbow Room and have, maybe a cannabis beverage. So we see upscale, beautiful consumption lounges as what's going to happen in New York. Social equity, planned in the statute, is at a baseline. The vision is a baseline of 50% of all new licenses are social equity. Well, who knows what that means and how do we, educate and fund those groups? But also women are considered social equity applicants. So I like that. So just a little sampling of a few things. Micro licenses are there, and actually the statute's written so it's not just a whole many more of fully integrated big licenses. There will be some micro licenses, and a few of us are guessing at how many there could be, and we feel that number is going to be very low. So there's a lot of street talk about what could be, but those regs are not out. So that's New York. Let me pause. David, anything to add that I might have overlooked or something? Just to,
I yeah, I mean, New York coming into the mix, I think is as you mentioned, very exciting. I'm hopeful that the regulations avoid some of the mistakes that California has made. You said that New York is the largest legacy market. Unfortunately for California, California still has that honor despite having a fully legal adult use market. Our legacy market is many times the size of the legal market. And a lot of that comes down to tax and regulatory policy that was really ill-conceived and that did not make an easy path for the legacy market to participate in the new legal framework. New York is going to have a really similar challenge on its hands, and hopefully they create policies that allow these legacy operators easier access to the market and create a tax structure that allows the legal market to outcompete the unregulated market.
No doubt. And you can keep that honor, David, but guess what? It is that beautiful outdoor or beautifully indoor grown flower that's made its way to New York that helps make, keep
Absolutely.
us in the action on the legacy part. And it's a dual market in California. And think about the taxes and all those issues. There's no doubt we don't want that same dual market, but it will happen unless things happen. But we will talk about that in a bit.
Yeah,
Chris.
well, that was my follow-up too, Jeanne. I know the regulations aren't out yet, but what's the sense about where they're going to come down on taxes? Is the feeling in Albany and as you're working the halls out there that learning from the issues in California that maybe a reasonable tax rate might be in the works?
Listen, it's time for me to use my one-liner I've been using. Thomas Edison said, there's always a better way to do things. Go find it. We hope to find it. And there is some thinking it won't be quite as draconian, but there's no doubt needs have to happen there. California just raised taxes again with a big outcry. It's really bad. So we're hopeful to find better ways through this. More on that. So here's what else is going on. New Jersey. So sure enough, when you're in a crowd in New York and New Jersey, people snicker and laugh, making fun of New Jersey. I lived there for many years before I moved to Manhattan, so I get to join in the fun. But they absolutely, Governor Murphy ran on that platform. They absolutely signed legislation, which happened, and so that's pretty exciting that happened. And they have issued regs, more to come. However, just let me level set what they have. Today, there's 23 dispensaries, so that's they did fairly well on that, and they just announced 14 new cannabis businesses. But ready for this? After a 2-year wait, uh, those license people in license pursuit applied 2 years ago, and 14 just got announced. 4 are fully vertical out of that. We know several of those 4 and several of the 14. And in theory, it says that all of them were women owned or minority owned. Interesting, since that's not my view, since I know some of those. However, The goal is 26 growers and 61 dispensaries. Now, December 15th, they're issuing, check this little trick, they're issuing the licenses application for cannabis growers. I know many people in license pursuit, they've already written their application. And so they are going to not just wait for the application, they're going to hit the ground running December 15th, as soon as it conforms to the application. Is that your sense, David? I see you nodding your head.
Yeah, absolutely. We're already working
I know.
with folks up and down the East Coast to prepare. If you're looking for a license in one of the states that is about to come online, where new laws have been passed, and you're not already, and at least in the process of putting together your team, your application,
Right.
and your plan, you're behind the curve, and you've got some
This
catching up to do.
This is true, but so that everyone doesn't panic, March 15th is when the dispensary application process starts for New Jersey. So there's still time, but
There's
I
time.
do agree with
Yeah.
David that if you plan a retail license in New Jersey, it is important to plan starting now what that looks like, your possible location, your team, your financing. Critical for success because the competition is going to be great. Now, one other thing on cultivation. I did read all the regs closely, and there's a number of tiers from tier 1 up to tier 6. There's also a micro business license. So there's lots of opportunity, and it is going to be a rolling kind of thing. And let's face it, there's going to be more and more opportunity. So I'd rather see people go steadily forward than panic, but that's what's going on in New Jersey. And also, good news in Connecticut, that Governor Lamont on June 22nd of this year, he signed adult use legislation. That's pretty exciting. But they look like they're a little bit more aggressive. They hope to have even sales under the new statute by mid 2022. So that's an active state. Pretty exciting.
Yeah,
And today there's 18. Go ahead, David.
I'll believe that when I
Yes,
see it. It's
that's aggressive.
yeah. I'm glad
And
that they're
this,
ambitious.
yes. And Connecticut has drawn, because it's a very important, high population state, has drawn premier MSOs, GTI, Curaleaf, and this year Verano came in. So there's no doubt it's pretty exciting. So that's kind of a quick walk around the block on the East Coast wave. We are thrilled. It's about time. It's going to take a while, but it's finally happening. And I'm very hopeful that instead of just waiting for all the regs in New York, that they do issue them kind of piece by piece rather than one big tome. That would be a good way to go. And already they have let the 10 license holders, they're called ROs here, for registered organization, they have let them start selling whole flower. Do you believe up till right now, no flower, no edibles, I say no nothing. So it's been pretty bereft, pretty strange. No wonder the legacy market has been thriving. And so that's kind of a look at what's happening and what's going to happen.
Jeanne, just taking a step back at looking at New Jersey, I know there's been quite a bit of hubbub about the fact that a lot of cities and municipalities are not going to allow cannabis into their jurisdictions. Is the sense that there's going to be a slow shift back? Because I mean, something California is still struggling with these years later, or is that just kind of a hard and fast? Or you think people are just kind of grandstanding? Like, what's the vibe on the ground on there about that?
It's pretty weird to me. In New York, the municipalities and towns and cities are able to opt out by the end of this year. And then in theory, they can get back in, but that could be harder than it sounds. In New Jersey, they have to opt in, and some really important big areas haven't done that. So it's a little strange. We'll see. And we think it's silly. Those of us who play hard in this market, we think it's silly. Why not wealth creation? Why not tax revenue and all that? So these are some of the early anomalies, I feel, of what's going on in our nascent industry.
in New Jersey, there are folks who are already starting to lobby some of the local jurisdictions who are not currently planning to opt in to try to get them to change their mind. And look, it's really frustrating to see. It is one of the big issues, one of the big mistakes that California made, allowing jurisdictions to opt out. And what I would say to the folks running the cities and municipalities who are opting out is you don't have a choice about whether or not cannabis sales are going to happen in your jurisdiction. The only choice that you have is whether you're going to regulate it. You can opt out all you want, but people are going to
Right.
produce and sell cannabis
it's already
in your
happened.
town.
Do you want a piece of it or not? Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want some say over how that happens, or do you want to just leave that completely unregulated?
Yeah, that's a great point. Cool. Thanks so much for that quick tour around the East Coast cannabis scene, Jeanne. Let's move into the next topic. So we have some breaking news on this one, but we wanted to do a little legislation update. So David, we had originally talked that we were going to walk through the Safe Banking Act, talk about how likely it is to pass through on the military spending bill, but we just got news, I think yesterday, that it has officially been stripped out by the Dems specifically. So walk us through what happened there. What's the fallout? Where do we go next?
Yeah, I got a text early yesterday saying that it had been pulled out of the NDAA, which is a little disappointing to see. It also does offer an opportunity to bring it back next year with some additional modifications that I think would help it out. There's another chance to sort of start reintroducing this in February. So we'll see then if we can get it back on the table. It is really unbelievably frustrating to see the party that has been the sort of primary champion of cannabis policy reform being the one that is standing in the way of this really meaningful piece of legislation. The argument that the Democrats in the Senate who are holding this back are using is that they're scared that incremental change will delay a larger full legalization bill, which I understand the sentiment there, but the fact is that none of the bills that the Democrats have put forward are anywhere close to being in a state where they could pass the Senate. So they're essentially saying we're not going to make the status quo better because we have this like far off dream of being able to put a big picture legalization bill together. And it's just not realistic. And in the meantime, we're seeing dispensaries that are being robbed, right? There's been this rash of armed robberies where large numbers of armed thieves are coming into stores, not just in the cannabis industry, but it's been an especially big problem in the cannabis industry because of the large amounts of cash that are there as a result of not having easy access to traditional banking services and credit card payments. So this is a problem that needs to be fixed, and it needs to be fixed urgently, whether or not full legalization comes along with it. And since we don't really have a straightforward path to full legalization this year, it is a little disappointing to see the safe banking get stripped from the NDAA. There are a lot of arguments out there saying that safe banking is just built to benefit the big banks. It's not. This is not about helping the banks. This is about helping the cannabis industry. The big banks are doing fine. Will they benefit from safe banking? Yeah, some of them a little bit, but in the scheme of things, this is not really a consequential change from their perspective to the same extent that it is a really big game changer for anybody who's operating a cannabis business that is having trouble accessing the kinds of services that every other industry just takes for granted. It is absolutely absurd that companies that are expected to operate in compliance with government regulations and pay, in many cases, ridiculous tax rates are not able to access the kinds of banking and payment services that are almost a prerequisite to operating any business in this day and age.
You know, David, you used the words a little disappointing. I'm a lot disappointed. I'm actually quite upset about it because it had a chance. And and as you said, it's so important, especially for many of the smaller operators. Now, one thing I learned, because early this morning, Alan Brockstein, of course, commented, and he said something I wasn't sure of. This particular version did not include the uplifting to the New York exchanges, the NYSE and the NASDAQ. And that's important. So you appropriately mentioned an enhanced version of safe banking, which we do need, a more comprehensive bill. In fact, that was kind of the issue the reason it didn't pass. They didn't want it just tucked into this defense spending bill. But I am sorely disappointed that it hasn't happened. I want credit card rails. I want easy banking for many. And it's very disappointing. And also, as Broxine points out, a sentiment today, a forward motion. So I'm disgusted that we can't get something like this done. I think it looks like the gang that couldn't shoot straight, and it is very disappointing to me.
Yeah, agreed. Very disappointing. Progress is progress in any way. There's so much to be gained even from incremental change. And it's frustrating to see essentially the guys who are the face of cannabis legalization and that level, and Schumer and Booker being the guys pushing back. It's like if it comes from some extreme right wing, something, it's like, okay, well, that's sort of part of the deal. But to see the guys who are, on a certain sense, supposed to be advocating the most, also hindering progress, I don't know. It starts to make me wonder, like, is this sort of a bit of grandstanding, this whole stance? Are these big legalization bills that they know have no chance of passing really just about taxpayer, and they have no real interest in?
Yeah, I mean, it's clear to me that bills like the CAOA, at least in its current form, are designed to generate press releases. That the CAOA, it's currently written, absolutely no chance of passage, and frankly, I wouldn't want it. It's so deeply problematic that that I think it would be counterproductive in a lot of ways, and that's coming from someone who fully supported California's and still fully supports California's unbelievably problematic legalization bill. I am for taking some pretty big compromises when we can push things forward, but the CAOA, as it's currently written, is sort of a bridge too far in that regard. Ironically, and I've been saying this for years, that there's an opportunity because the Democrats have been dragging their feet, and because cannabis legalization is such a popular issue among Americans across demographics, across political beliefs, there's an opening for Republicans to come in and take this issue away from Democrats, right? This is, how often do you get an issue that has, for adult use, 60% support, and for medical, 90% support in the American public is unheard of. And the Democrats, who are well positioned to make this their issue, to champion this, have just been bungling it for years. And now we're seeing with things like this new Nancy Mace bill, the sort of the beginning, I think, of the Republicans' intention to step up and try to snatch this issue away from Democrats. And frankly, look, the Nancy Mace bill is not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but it is better than anything that the Democrats have put out by a pretty wide margin, which is an interesting dynamic to see play out.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, great segue into our next topic, which is the States Reform Act, like you said, which is, I would consider, a highlight of the year and was a big shocker to me. When we talked about this earlier, David, you mentioned that this was the most viable legalization bill that you've ever seen. To have it come out of southern state, South Carolina, was a pretty big shock.
Yeah, it's a really interesting bill in how hands-off it is compared to things like more in the CAOA, and looking at, right, like a lot of the equity that is built into things like more is not good policy. Some of it is, and social equity is super important, and we need to be factoring these things in. But we often forget that one of the things are like the things that make it harder or hardest for minority businesses to exist, to much less thrive in the cannabis industry, are the regulatory hurdles that make it so difficult and expensive, or in some cases just flat out impossible to get and maintain a cannabis license. And by making that process easier, that creates the opportunity for small businesses in general and minority businesses in particular to operate. So when I see things, I think that the original draft of the MACE bill had a federal tax rate at 3.75%, which is a reasonable tax rate. The newer draft of that, I think, has lowered it to 3%. That is a level that is appropriate. That's an appropriate tax rate for cannabis. When we see things like 25% in some of the stuff that the Democrats are putting out, if you absolutely want to have an unregulated market forever, set a federal tax rate at 25%. And that would be, by the way, on top of whatever state and local taxes you already have. So in a place like California, where there's a very expensive cultivation tax that gets compounded as it travels down the supply chain, there's a 15% excise tax, there's a roughly 10% state and local sales tax. Many local jurisdictions have an additional local tax of 5 or 10%. And then we see jurisdictions on top of all that, which have, like, San Diego has an 8% gross receipts tax for all cannabis businesses. It's just not tenable. There's no way to outcompete the unregulated market when you're burdened with those kinds of taxes.
Yeah, absolutely. Jeanne, got anything you want to add to the sort of legislative outlook?
You know, it's my big hope that we can fix this tax issue. It's I totally support what David said, but it's crazy. You know, in New York, even if the statute proposed levels are low, then even in New York City, they're going to layer on another big chunk, you know, because we have our own set of taxes. So we got to get a hold of this. Let's get smart, or it is going to be a dual market forever.
Absolutely. And, you know, another sort of smaller highlight, and again, another almost breaking news thing, is that I'm not going to lie, one of my favorites, AOC, and has just introduced an act as well, the HOPE Act. And, you know, it's a small thing. It's not legalization, but it's legislation that's going to help states expunge cannabis. And it's still fresh out there, but is there any sense that this is going to get some traction? And we have any hope of this incremental change?
Go ahead.
I mean, I hope that it will, but I don't know how realistic it is. AOC is really controversial. It's going to be hard for a lot of Republicans to get behind anything that she does. Expungement is hugely important. It's one of the really big social fixes that we need to make to to start walking in the other direction after just absolutely demolishing communities with the war on drugs. So I'm super hopeful that it at least starts or continues the broader conversation about how important expungement is. And I'll be thrilled if we see expungement pass, whether or not it's tied to a broader legalization effort.
It is, of course, we know how, what's a nice way to put it, allergic the Republicans tend to be to AOC and her cohort's entire platform. But she did actually co-sponsor it with a Republican Democrat or a Republican Ohio congressman too. So I was surprised by that too. But there's some hope for some traction there. For our next topic, Jeanne, this is something you brought up that I know that you're really passionate about and what you're seeing in the marketplace. I hope you can just sort of describe sort of what you're seeing as far as the shift in state markets and just the industry in general about, instead of pushing legacy operators away, but actually trying to figure out ways to bring them into the fold.
No doubt, Chris, 5 years ago, we said we don't want these drug dealers playing in our legal market. That has changed. We're saying, how do we bring legacy into legal? There's a whole raft of problems and issues related. But I happen to be a Steve D'Angelo groupie. He was one of the wonderful co-founders of Arcview, and we're all close to him. And he's been spending a lot of time in New York because he has a passion about not seeing New York make these same problems and issues reoccur, and they will unless we take action, unless we learn from each other. So he has developed a multi-point program. It kind of goes like this. First of all, he has cited 4 big issues, and these relate throughout the US, but certainly to New York. One is there's scarce access to capital. So we're very hopeful. In fact, we keep our ear very close to the ground that there will be an opportunity for funding for social equity applicants in a very powerful way. I think that's critical. And that's needed in so many different geographies, especially if we truly want to bring social equity applicants into the world of the legal market. Second is he really proposes amnesty, to find some way for both people and money to be free of past, issues and all that, and even goes so far as make a deal with the federal taxes that were once owed, make a deal on New York taxes, have some way to mitigate those issues. Third, come on, let's go. I mentioned this earlier. What about the training needed, the incubators, the mentoring? It's needed in real public to private kinds of partnerships that we could develop. There's so much money here. There's so much money in the US, but certainly on the East Coast, wanting to play, but may not know where to play. Let's create some opportunities for that. And then fourthly, this is very controversial, but it's all about interstate commerce. There's been a lot of thought leadership around that. We know the architect of all that, who's Adam Smith out of Oregon. But there's a real sense that could break open some of these crazy fiefdoms that we have. 50 states with 50 different rules. You could produce, Chris, the best product in California. You can't even legally send it to me. This is completely nuts. And so there's 4 kind of important things we could do to make a change. Now, there's plenty more too. First of all, he also has taught me that, did you know after alcohol prohibition ended, it took 20 years to end backroom bathtub gin? You don't go looking for that anymore, do you? No, you get the finest craft spirits you can find if that's what you like. And so it's going to take many years to come up with solid, great programs, and then time, to reduce the impact of, flour that's not even tested in some parts, all that goes with bringing healthy, beautiful product to market. So I'm really for that, and I'm really dedicated to the kind of advisory and support and connections needed. And that's if we really meet, I told you earlier that there's a goal, a real vision that 50%, not just of social equity applicants, but of across the board on licenses in the New York future plan. Well, how are we going to achieve that plan unless we can really help each other make that happen? So, some of the other ideas, he's got a 10-point program, that's Steve, about how to fix that. And I have his permission to talk about some of these things. One is, why not provisional licenses for legacy operators? Have them go through a certain drill and the testing procedures and everything of flower. And I think that's really, just an idea. Another, I said earlier, let's start issuing the regulations now, just not wait for a year from now. Let's let more freedom happen for these 10 operators, because guess what? They're the only ones who are growing legally tested flower. So let's let it prevail. Let's make it easy. And so that, along with these tax issues, I think are some steps. Something else to share, though, too, that's pretty exciting about what's happening on the East Coast. And people ask me this all the time. What about the brands? Are we just going to, now I believe there's fabulous, gorgeous brands that these Western states have created, certainly all up and down California and the West Coast. But we believe that in New York and in the Northeast, there's a real culture vibe, and there's going to be a whole world of new brands that take on the New York culture and the East Coast culture. One of my favorite things to share is you're not going to see Bodega Bar's brand in West Hollywood, right? So we're excited about that. It's going to be a whole new world of a product and just a way of doing business that's, I think, is going to be pretty exciting.
Yeah,
absolutely.
that's a really good point, and we're seeing sort of both sides of that coin. We're helping a lot of established West Coast brands expand their footprint into other states, including these new East Coast markets. But we're also helping develop brand strategy for new brands that are really focused on things that are likely to resonate better with, say, New York market or with a Massachusetts market, right? There are significant cultural differences both within the culture of cannabis as well as the society more broadly between these markets. I mean, frankly, I've traveled a lot. I've been to 48 of the 50 states, been to quite a few countries. There are other countries that are more similar to the Bay Area culturally than a lot of other states in the United States. So, really creating brands that resonate with specific demographics is important, and we're fortunate to have just a wealth of really granular consumer data that allows us to understand at a much deeper level who cannabis consumers are, why they consume, where they consume, when they consume, how often, and what product forms they like. And there's a lot of significant variation, and that variation is both for cultural reasons as well as just supply chain reasons. At this point, the product availability in different markets varies to a large extent. So understanding that is something that brands really need to start reckoning with as they move to expand. Otherwise, they're going to either fail to compete adequately or make some really big avoidable mistakes and spend a lot of money on plans that were doomed from the start.
Yeah, and it's really inspiring, honestly, to hear that Steve's over on the East Coast, really advocating and bringing some of the lessons we learned. Because as you talked through his points and the importance of bringing these legacy growers in. It just ticks off all of these issues that we're still struggling with in California, because we had initially softening maybe a little bit this antagonistic attitude towards the legacy growers. And there's just, it seems like low-hanging fruit to get the folks who know the industry already into the industry, just at the least to combat the black market, which is still such an issue. Because if we're not going to incentivize them to join, they're going to be competitors. They're not going anywhere. It's not like they're going to just all of a sudden decide not to do what they've been doing for so many years. And so, yeah.
Well, it's actually a little bit worse than that. So I sat as a co-chair of the dissertation committee for a doctoral researcher at Northeastern who was writing her dissertation on specifically how California's cannabis policy discourages participation from legacy operators. And she interviewed a bunch of people operating in the cannabis industry in California and looked very closely at the regulatory structure here. And one of the things that came out over the course of this dissertation was there are what I'll sort of refer to as benign legacy operators. These are people who care about the plant. They care about providing good, high quality cannabis to people who need or want it. They are not violent. They're not engaged in sort of other more socially problematic criminal activity. And then there are folks who are organized crime, right? Like there are violent criminals who participate in the illicit cannabis trade. In a place like California, that has been a minority, right? Most of the legacy market is not these violent criminals that are a really big problem to society. Most of the operators have been these sort of benign legacy operators that we want to incorporate into the new market. But as we've started to step up enforcement against operators, we've seen some of those benign legacy operators start to drop out, leaving a bigger void that is being filled by the more problematic criminal elements. And that is something that is absolutely devastating, to see that our regulatory policy is essentially opening wide gaps in the market for organized crime to take root in a place, right? Like, there's no reason why we should have space in the market for them. The legal industry should outcompete the entire unregulated market, but certainly if we're going to have an unregulated market, we want it to be populated with not sort of hardened violent criminals. And the policies that we're implementing are sort of a return to the war on drugs that are pushing us very much in a direction of having as harmful a cannabis industry as is possible to have.
Yeah, absolutely. Best we can do is hope. We're going to learn from those mistakes, and it's hard once those laws get put into place, but maybe, as New York and these other states implement more progressive laws, that we can, in California and other states, learn from those as well and make those kinds of changes.
And in California's state case, here's something on the off chance that there are any California legislators watching, or if any of you are watching and you're speaking to California legislators, I've gone up to Sacramento and testified as an expert on California tax policy to try to get bills that suspended cultivation tax or lowered excise taxes to move, and they've made some progress in committee, but have ultimately failed in the larger assembly. We're going to end up in a federally legal marketplace, and that is going to involve interstate commerce. Now, we don't have a specific timeline on that, but in some number of years, probably some single-digit number of years, and maybe in the next few, we are going to end up in a situation where it's legal to sell wholesale cannabis across state lines. California, everything about California positions it to be the absolutely dominant force in the national cannabis trade. We have the best growers. We have the most of them. We already produce something like 90% of the unregulated cannabis in the country. We produce more in our legal market than any other market. Everything about our climate, everything about our history of cannabis cultivation means that we should absolutely be the biggest player in sort of national cannabis wholesale. But our current tax structure will preclude that, right? Us entering a national market with our current tax policies would be like Usain Bolt entering a race with his legs tied together. It just doesn't make any sense. So even for the greediest of California legislators that really wants to maximize tax revenue at every turn, the way to maximize tax revenue is to lower taxes and get a smaller, more reasonable piece of a much, much bigger pie. That's true even before interstate commerce. We're getting less than a quarter of cannabis sales that happen in California are in the legal market. So significantly lowering that tax rate and allowing us to capture a tax revenue from a significantly larger portion of cannabis sales will already increase tax revenue. And once interstate commerce is a thing, the opportunity to generate revenue from cannabis grown in California will eclipse this little piddly legal market that we've managed to cobble together on a broken system so far.
Yeah, absolutely. When you're talking to these legislators, what kind of response do you get? Sorry, we're sort of segueing into one of our lowlights, which was the California tax raise in a year where California, especially cultivators, especially in the last 6 months, have been absolutely struggling. And we're seeing this is going out of business, absolutely crushed. And little cherry on top. Well, I think last week we get the notification that, in fact, taxes are going up next year due to inflation. When we're sitting here talking, I mean, it seems really obvious. The benefits of lowering the tax rate will increase revenue. There's so many benefits. I mean, and Jeanne, you can jump in too. Like when you're talking to these legislators, what pushback do you get to something that seems so logical and obvious?
So first of all, I'm very happy to say that every time I've gone and testified in front of assembly committees, the bills that I was there to talk about have actually successfully moved out of committee, then failed in the larger assembly. So maybe it's just a matter of talking to more legislators because it appears to be making progress. I think, look, California or cannabis is a big deal to us. It's sort of top of mind for those of us in the industry. But California is a big and very complicated state. And for most legislators, cannabis is not the biggest thing. It's not the biggest issue that they're dealing with. They're not very knowledgeable about it. They don't understand it well. They don't understand that really, it's one of the most complex industries and markets in the world. It has so many peculiarities that separate it from any other industry that legislators are used to looking at, that it's understandable that they don't really have a good sense of how to make heads or tails of it. We need to do a better job educating them, and they need to do a better job listening. But the biggest pushback is, I think, just the failure to grasp the relatively simple concept that you can, in fact, increase tax revenue by lowering taxes. And there's all sorts of political stuff tied up into that with Reaganomics and the Laffer curve and all of these. There have been decades of debate about the broader topic of lowering taxes to increase tax revenue. And in this specific case, it looks nothing like it looks very different from the sort of broader argument for, say, lowering corporate tax rates or lowering taxes on the rich, right? This is a really specific use case where a very straight line can be drawn between lowering tax rates and and increasing tax revenue, as well as just a whole host of other social benefits to allowing the legal market to incorporate or displace the unregulated market. So yeah, it's tough. You right, like it's not. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Legislators have seen tax revenue come in and they say, well, if you increase tax rates, you'll get more revenue. And that's sort of the extent of their thinking. And look, there are some really intelligent legislators out there, but that is not, I'm sorry to say, the norm. Many legislators in the United States at all levels of government and in all states that I've had any experience with are, put it politically and say distracted. What I really mean is that they're not all Rhodes Scholars.
Yeah, that's funny. But I really do like that point about that one-on-one communication to really explain what's going on, because I imagine a lot of legislators just can't be seen in their constituency voting what might be seen as a pro cannabis without really getting into the details. So just explaining that at a fundamental level, I think that really makes a lot of sense.
One thing I did in sync with what David was speaking about is for 2 years in a row, both pre-COVID, of course, I went to the Hill, went to Congress for NCIA for lobby days. That was a fascinating experience, frustrating, but fascinating. But we were well trained. They did a great job of really teaching us the ropes and how to approach the subject, and it was all on safe banking. And but we were warned, and David actually said this. It's not a top priority in the scheme of things in Congress. There's so many other issues they're dealing with, including, the mess around COVID, et cetera. And so we had to, we learned the ropes in short form, what to say and how to say it. Again, I just register my disappointment that at least a first big step wasn't taken yesterday by pulling it out of the defense bill. So it's a combination of it's complicated, people don't understand it, they need to understand it. Talking to, Congress people and Senate staffers is a fascinating experience, but it is frustrating. And but I am mindful that it's one of hundreds of really important things. So,
I mean, one of the things that I can point to sort of explain a lot of the otherwise inexplicable nonsense that we have to deal with in the cannabis industry is, I don't know if anyone watched a couple of years ago when some of the tech CEOs got called in front of Congress to testify, right, and they had to answer questions from our elected representatives. Some of these questions betrayed such a deep misunderstanding of how technology and social media works that it makes you cringe to think that these are the people that we're expecting to regulate this really important thing, right? Like, social media is one of the more influential things that has happened in the last decade. It's incredibly impactful and important, and regulating it correctly is super important. And legislators were asking questions like, wait a second, you don't sell anything, then how do you make money, right? To a company like Facebook. This is, their level of understanding of technology is far ahead of many of their levels of understanding of the cannabis industry. So we do have a big task ahead of us in educating these folks, which is why it's so important that you support organizations like Minority Cannabis Business Association, Marijuana Policy Project, National Cannabis Industry Association, U.S. Cannabis Council, right? There are a lot of fantastic organizations that are doing work. The really expensive, time-consuming, and gritty work of getting legislators on the right page about this, and it's how we've made so much progress, especially now that we've killed all the low-hanging fruit of the initiative states, the ballot initiative states. We have a lot of legislative battles ahead of us, and so lobbying is super important. And when I look at every other industry that has major revenue, the amount of money they spend on lobbying is it absolutely dwarfs what we spend as the cannabis industry. And that's why they get the things that they want. The industries get the things that they want. And sometimes that's good for society, and sometimes that's bad. But we as an industry need to step up. The cannabis reform movement was shouldered primarily on the backs of philanthropists for a long time. And the philanthropists are looking at this new industry sprouting up, and they're saying, hey, we've done our job. We got you this far, and now people are actually starting to make some money. Why don't you put your money where your mouth is? And so far, there are some companies that have stepped up in a really big way, but a lot of them have not.
Absolutely. We do have a good question from the audience from Time Alone. Thanks for dropping it in there. Do you see a way that crypto and NFTs can play a part in the industry without make it harder to tax? Something that's coming up with a lot of our operators lately. Can they take crypto as payment and so on? And we're working that out. But what do you guys say? This is we'll call this a nice segue into our predictions for 2022. But where do we stand on this?
Yeah, I've seen dozens at this point of companies that have come through looking to do something with crypto and cannabis. What I'll say is that both crypto and cannabis are very new industries that are very complicated and for which regulators have a lot of hesitations. And combining the two tends to put people on edge, tends to put regulators on edge, and just either one of those things, right? Operating with crypto or operating in cannabis are very complex undertaking. So it's difficult to mesh those two together. I'm not saying that it's impossible. I haven't seen anything particularly compelling yet, other than some potentially interesting uses of blockchain that are unrelated to NFTs and cryptocurrency, using blockchain as a sort of a regulatory verification tool or a supply chain management tool. But right now, cryptocurrency is hugely volatile. Most consumers don't know how to use cryptocurrency. So there's a big barrier to entry to getting it adopted in sort of a widespread manner. I think there could be some interesting things done with NFTs and cannabis art or something like that. I've seen a few cannabis NFT proposals that folks are working on that, I don't know, they don't seem like they have legs to me. But that being said, right, I wouldn't have expected somebody to buy a tweet for millions of dollars either. So who knows where that will all end up. But I would caution people that I've never seen anybody sort of come close to succeeding with a cryptocurrency and cannabis play to date.
Yeah, I think from our perspective, there's some momentum here. We are on sort of parallel paths, just as like you're saying, emerging industries. There will be some overlap, especially because the populations do, in fact, overlap as far as enthusiasm goes. From our very CPA focused, stay within the lines, don't get in trouble, it's not worth it. We don't really recommend or push policies that are super crypto friendly. I think as the space evolves, as that volatility sort of levels out, as regulations get involved, I think there's a lot of potential there. We've talked to clients about doing capital raises as far as launching coins and things like that. So there might be alternative, avenues to investment and that kind of thing. But yeah, right now it's something that I would not recommend crossing those streams and adding volatility to a certain extent.
The other thing, so for companies that are specifically looking at sort of crypto payment solutions, of which there are several, I would give sort of the same advice that I give to any alternative payment solution provider in the cannabis industry, which is that the current federal policy makes space for something like that to potentially work, but safe banking I do expect to pass at some point, and maybe as early as sometime in the front half of next year. When that passes, you better have a really compelling value proposition, because if your whole sort of justification for existing is that cannabis companies have a hard time getting traditional banking and merchant services, that could very well end quickly.
Yeah. So we are actually over our time limit, but I did promise our audience that we'd do some predictions for 2022. So if you guys wouldn't mind, let's just all go around, make sort of one outlook kind of statement towards 2022. Let's start with you, Jeanne. You got anything?
We just get one, Chris? Jeez.
Well, we could go. I mean, this conversation's flown so nicely, but I don't want to take up everyone's day.
All right.
But
Well, okay.
if you do it fast, you can do as many as you want.
All right, good. All right, I can do it fast. I'm going to do a few. This may sound like a laydown, but you've already heard in the earlier part of our discussion, East Coast is finally happening. So I predict that certainly New York will finally issue the regs and applications will happen. I don't know if I shared this earlier. In 2014, when we applied, there were only 43 applications. We believe there will be 4,300 applications for a license. And so we'll see that happen in 2022. And then I agree with David. I do think, and I'm just soothing over my own disappointment, that SAFE will happen finally with a more comprehensive bill in 2022. I'll stop right there, even though I have a few more, but go on, back to David.
Sure. I think one of the things that we'll continue to see is the continued development of sort of the low dose market. There is, I think, there's a lot of room to grow. There's still a lot of cannabis consumers, and the highest spending cannabis consumers are still by and large focused on sort of high THC product. But this new market, which will ultimately comprise many more people than the sort of smaller high THC focused market of people who are looking for low dose products, I think is going to continue to expand, and we'll see more innovation in that space. Companies like Cann in California have done an amazing job of sort of showing the power of this market of people buying 2 milligram drinks. On that front, I think that the beverage market is going to continue to expand next year. We've been hearing for years, ever since Constellation Brands made their first big investment into canopy growth. We've been hearing about how big the beverage market is going to be. Still, in most states, it's 1 to 2% of the overall market. So this tiny little segment. Part of that is sort of getting consumers used to a new form factor. A big part of that is that cannabis supply chains are not built for beverages, which are big, heavy, sometimes come in breakable containers, sometimes need a cold chain, hard to move around, hard to store. But we're seeing in quite a few states real concerted efforts to build out beverage supply chains within the regulated cannabis supply chain. So I expect beverages to continue to eat market share. And I'm really curious to see what happens with Delta 8. I think like right now, Delta 8 is a big concern to a lot of folks in a lot of states who are wondering what to do about this. For those not familiar, Delta 8 THC is a another molecule that is very similar to Delta-9 THC, but because of the way the Farm Bill was written, it counts as hemp, and you can produce Delta-8 from hemp that doesn't contain over the legal limit of Delta-9 THC. So there are a lot of Delta-8 products that are being sold primarily in states where there isn't easy access to Delta-9. We've seen some states start banning Delta-8. It'll be really interesting to watch how regulators respond to that issue, because I mean, I would love it if they didn't have to respond, but I think that's unrealistic.
There's no doubt a lot of CBD shops are counting on Delta-8 products for revenue. I managed to get somebody close to me very buzzed on a 25 milligram gummy, had no idea what the effect was, and it was very, very powerful. And but I would also add to what David said about beverages. Finally, beverages are tasting better. They have sucked in taste to date. That has changed. And you're not going to smoke a joint in a hotel lobby, or let's say sitting at in the Rainbow Room at dinner at our new consumption lounge, but you are potentially going to drink a low dose drink because you may want more than one. And also, women, most women, don't want some hefty, big, powerful 50 milligram drink or greater. So having a 2 or 3 THC milligram combined with CBD with delicious taste, that is another prediction that I believe this year we saw brands really start. We saw the Wana, a powerful option to buy for a huge dollar amount, $300 million by Canopy Growth. I say 2022, we're going to see a real acceleration around brands. Brands are here, but their big year is coming. You know, it started this year in a big way, but it's really going to accelerate next year and the year after.
Yeah, as the market matures, it's going to turn into a brand.
And there's some beautiful brands out there now, so it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, I'm still amazed if I go to a dispensary, remembering the dime bags of seeded weed, brown weed I used to buy when I was 16 versus the beautiful packaging and the incredible flower that you can get now legally. It dates me a little bit, but it's still remarkable. I did want to follow up with both of you about the beverages. How tied to the rise in consumption lounge is beverage growth, do you think?
In my view, totally.
Yeah.
Because many may not want, look, I don't want to sit in a smoke-filled room.
It's not legal in most places anyway.
Yeah. So beverages, that's one of the answers. And we're so used to consuming beverages in a social setting.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there will be the opportunity for both balconies and terraces and other outdoor. But yes, that's going to be one of the form factors of choice.
And really, I mean, I think whether or not a state allows social lounges, I think beverages have a big opportunity in social lounges, social consumption lounges, but whether or not a state has sort of licensed social consumption lounges, as people start to get together again more in person at parties and various things, beverages are going to be a really good option. And if you want, looking at Ken, the CEO comes from a background in traditional CPG, and Ken is a masterclass in branding. And one of the things that you'll notice on Ken boxes is there are a bunch of statements that tell you exactly what they want you to do. Like, share these with your friends in giant bold letters on the box, right? Which is not necessarily the first thing that you think of when you're buying cannabis, but to have that kind of messaging, bring this to a party, on the package, I think it was really smart, in order to sort of get people used to this fundamentally different way of consuming cannabis and get them sort of spreading it around to other people. So I think one of the things that's been really interesting to watch as COVID has gone through its various ups and downs is the effects that COVID has had on the cannabis market. And we've seen things like, for example, the really sharp rise in popularity of the little dog walker joints that come in multi-packs, which
Right.
makes sense because before the pandemic, a lot of people would buy a big, 1 gram joint, 1.5 gram joint, and bring it to a party and share that joint with their friends. They may not be comfortable doing that anymore, but if you walk into a party with a pack of 5 or 10 joints, now all of a sudden you can still share a joint, but without having to pass it around.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And that segues into sort of what I was thinking too, is following up on the beverages. I think, there's sort of two divergent theories about how the market's going to grow. There's a sense that the weed is going to get stronger. There's going to be this really craft type angle that we're going, and that's going to expand, and that's going to be great too. But I'm personally as far as normalization and where the bulk of the market will be is actually going to be in that sort of light beer type category, where it's about normalization, it's about changing. And a lot of people, what holds people back from partaking in cannabis is that they can't handle even like a 2.5, 5 milligram, one hit off of a joint. It's a lot of times too much. And where the beverages are going as far as the formulation and going as far as smaller amounts passing through you more quickly and making it a more social type of engagement is really going to be a really big part of that. And so they're doing great work in that direction.
Yeah, I think because of a lot of the restrictions on advertising, both legal and sort of policy restrictions at the level of companies like Facebook and Google, customer acquisition is still a big hurdle for cannabis brands, figuring out how to find consumers. And the fact is that right now, the consumers who spend by far the most money on cannabis are looking for those really high dose products, which is, I think, why there's been such a big focus on them. Because if you get one of those, they might spend hundreds of dollars. Whereas the folks who are more interested in the low dose, some of them will spend a lot of money on that, but most of them are sort of more occasional, more casual consumers who aren't going to spend as much individually, but there are a lot more of those people. So as brands figure out how to acquire those customers and how to get more of those casual people to every once in a while come into a dispensary and buy things, I think we'll see a big opportunity for more of those kinds of products.
Something else has happened that will expand it. Now, smart business owners and entrepreneurs of these brands have figured out how to get expansion into other states through the use of well-done SOPs. So, and also the emulsion technologies, as you know, David, have become more sophisticated. Let's say mobile units that can make things happen in other states more quickly. So there's a lot that's happened in the supply chain part of brands and beverages to accelerate the production and the distribution of these products. It's pretty exciting what's happening. I have a close-up view of that in Massachusetts, which is alive and well, with well over $1.5 billion of sales, and that's just year to date this year. So, and it's happened because there's a lot of beverages happening there. Can found their way to do their SOPs using GTI to license it in that state, and boy, there we go. And so, it's so easy to find now these beautiful products because they figured out the licensing, how to produce them quickly, how to have them be great tasting, same taste, etc. So that's pretty exciting. That's new over the last couple of years.
Yeah.
And it wasn't that way before.
Yeah. And I know both of our companies do a lot as far as helping cannabis operators create SOPs and just become more sophisticated,
Definitely.
or act more like mainstream companies, because there are so many efficiencies and through vertical integration and through strong supply chains that can be gained.
Right.
And we connect a lot of folks to partners in other states. I've been really surprised this year to see how much of that kind of work we're doing.
Yes.
Working with brands that may be successful in one state and helping them identify good potential partners as well as paths to market entry in other states.
Yeah, absolutely. We should talk about this more offline, but that's a big thing that we do for our clients as well, because it's as a requirement. The industry is so insular that, we work with brands and they know we have, clients in more limited areas like Hawaii or Montana, and we help them gain entry into those states through our clients. I do want to use my opportunity to talk about what I'm looking forward to answer is a good question from John Wayne 420. Before we wrap, he asked what we think about the New Mexico market. And this is something I'm particularly passionate about. I love New Mexico. We lived in Santa Fe for many years. Big fan. And we also produced some content on this earlier this month. We ran the numbers. We took a look at the licensing, and I think it's low-key going to be one of the stronger emerging markets. It's not getting as much attention as some of, say, our friends on the East Coast, but we've looked at current market saturation, the current strength of the medical market, the licensing, which is currently open, and not too expensive to get. The tax structure is not too punishing, and there's a lot of untapped potential in that market. So John Wayne 420, very positive on New Mexico. We think it's going to be right up there a couple of years down the road with their neighbors in Arizona.
I do too. I've spent time in New Mexico, and Chris, I got a present for you. This week alone, I talked to two really great business owners, both going for licenses in New Mexico and playing there. And so, yeah, to have that kind of support and expertise, that's great.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, send you a couple of possible new clients.
That would be great. We always love that. So, all right, we have gone well over our allotted time, but time flies when you're having fun. I just want to give you guys an opportunity. Anything last you want to, add to this conversation before we sign off? Nope. Good.
I would just say, let's go. I think in line again with predictions, something that's, I don't want to end on a sour note, but this tax issue in California, because they just raised taxes again, it's possibly going to create, in fact, I know, creating a tax revolt already. So, hey, let the people speak and let's make change. So, my positive tone to that is, sometimes you have to go to the street to make things happen. Let's, I predict that could happen. And let's just get on with the show and make, bring wealth. I like to say it this way, wealth and wellness to bear for many.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. My final note would be, we're at the point now when we really need to focus on making not just a legal cannabis industry, but a good legal cannabis industry. And so it's time for us to have a lot more of these very nuanced conversations about how to do that, and hopefully push back against bad tax policy, against some of the a bunch of MSOs are pushing against things like home grow in various states, and that's really disappointing to see. Not for many reasons, not the least of which is that home growers are actually among the highest spenders in dispensaries. So they're hurting their market by discouraging this kind of passion for the cannabis plant. But yeah, let's make a really good, inclusive, open cannabis industry for everyone.
As someone who tried for the first time to grow at home and failed miserably this fall, I'm going to second that. That sent me back to the store for the good stuff. So,
come to Amsterdam University.
Yeah.
They'll teach you how to grow.
Everyone said it was easy. It would just grow like a weed. Much more difficult. Growing from seed was, wow, it was very disheartening. Anyway, yeah, so that's all. Thank you guys so much. Great conversation. Love chatting with you guys. Thanks so much for our audience. Some good questions. So yeah, that's what we got. Thanks so much, you
Thank you.
guys. And
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, David.
great. All right. Cheers, everyone. Have a good one.